Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Chamber's Education Reform Signature Event, which we've entitled Education Matters. We are going to hear today about the future of K through 12 education and early childhood education in New Mexico. I'm Kyle Beasley, this year's chairman of the Chamber's Board of Directors and a senior vice president at Bank of Albuquerque. For anyone who has followed the Chamber's work for any length of time knows that our organization is focused on addressing three major challenges to long-term economic growth in New Mexico. We call them bold issue groups, or BIGs, and they are crime and public safety, education reform, and downtown transformation. If we can substantially improve the academic performance of our kids, create safer communities for people to live and work, and build a vibrant downtown for residents and visitors alike, we believe our city and state will thrive, our businesses will grow, jobs will be added, and wages will rise. Each year, we hold events to bring the business community the very latest information and perspectives from high-level decision makers and experts in these three big areas. This year, despite the pandemic, will be no exception. We're happy that you've joined us for our Education Reform Big event today. But first, I'd like to recognize our sponsors, the University of New Mexico and its president, Dr. Garnet Stokes, including UNM Health Sciences Center, UNM Health, UNM Comprehensive Cancer Center, and UNM Athletics. Unirac and its CEO, Peter Lorenz. P&M Resources and CEO, Pat Vincent Colon. Western Sky Community Care, CEO Tony Hernandez. Bank of Albuquerque, represented by myself and our CEO, Jennifer Thomas. Molina Healthcare, Executive VP of Policy and Government Affairs, Carolyn Ingram. New Mexico Mutual, CEO Norm Becker. Excellent Schools New Mexico, Executive Director Scott Hindman. Central New Mexico Community College and its president, Tracy Hartzler. Albertsons Market and its Vice President of the Albuquerque region, Travis Cheney. Blue Cross Blue Shield of New Mexico, CEO Kurt Shipley, and General Mills and its plant manager, Isabel Caponis. Thank you all for your sponsorship. Much appreciated. Appreciate your generosity and engagement. We also want to thank Alliance Audio Visual once again for their technical expertise in putting this event on. We wouldn't be here and couldn't be here today without your excellent work. Before we hear from our special guests, I'm going to turn the floor over to Chamber President and CEO Terri Cole and our Education Reform Big Chairman, Peter Lorenz, CEO of Unirac. They are going to talk briefly about the Chamber's beliefs, our work, and our priorities in the education arena. So with that, Terri, I'll turn it over to you. Terri, you're still on mute. There you go.
For me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, great. Thanks, Kyle, and welcome everyone. As Kyle mentioned, we are a very community-minded organization. Our interests are not narrow or parochial. We want to make big progress on issues that lift our economy across the board and for the long term. That's why we're so involved in education. I'm pleased to have Peter Lorenz, CEO of Unirac, here with me. Hi, Peter.
Hi, Terri. Good to see you.
Good to see you. Peter chairs the committee of chamber board members that oversees our education work. The goal we've set for the chamber is to advocate for education policies and practices that will lead to a direct improvement in the academic achievement of students in public schools and give every child the opportunity to receive a high quality education and adequately prepares them for success in college, the workforce, and life. It's an ambitious goal, and we're in it for the long haul. Peter, why don't you walk us through the Chamber's core beliefs about education in New Mexico?
Thanks, Terry, and hello, everyone. You can see our core beliefs here on the screen in front of you. So I won't go into each of them in detail, but let me focus on a few aspects here that we think is really important. So first, and everything really follows from this, we believe that every child is capable of learning and improving academically, regardless of his or her background. And every child deserves the chance to succeed. This must be our belief and also our expectation. If we believe this, then it follows that we should primarily measure the success in our school system by whether students are in fact learning. We need to know how are they growing and improving, how does this change over time, are they on track to graduate from high school, and when they do, are they prepared for college or the workforce? We as the business community, we appreciate that having the right set of measurement in place is a critical part of any continuous improvement effort. Now, we are very concerned about the academic performance of our children here in New Mexico. We know very few children are reading at grade level, and about a quarter of our kids do not graduate from high school. As a state, the Chamber believes that we need to focus on three things: closing the persistent achievement gaps that exist between minority and white children, identifying and intervening with struggling students and schools, and then also deploying high quality early childhood programs to make sure that children are ready to be learners when they enter kindergarten. Maybe let me add here, Terry, that and emphasize that our schools are the workforce pipeline for our employers here in New Mexico. We depend on our schools to produce innovators, engineers, entrepreneurs, and workers in general. And since I've been living here, I've not met a CEO who really wants to go outside of New Mexico and bring people in. We all want to hire locally, and we need a good talent pool for that. So that will help us grow our businesses, that will help us grow the economy, and then in return, our children will have a great place to stay here and good jobs.
Thanks, Peter. Over the past couple of years, we've put these beliefs into practice in several key ways. I'll just take a few minutes to review a few highlights. Number one, we were one of the first and certainly the largest organization to endorse the creation of the Early Childhood Department to better coordinate early childhood programs, improve oversight, develop an early childhood workforce, and require these programs to get results. We also then endorsed and worked to pass the creation of a new early childhood education endowment fund as last year to responsibly expand these programs over time. And number two, if every child should have access to a great education, then every family needs to have access to great schools that serve children and the needs of their children. That's why we strongly support the development and growth of charter schools, which is supported incidentally by roughly 7 in 10 parents in Bernalillo County, according to a recent survey. We've had the pleasure of working with 6 different high quality charter schools in Albuquerque to help them launch and expand. And these schools, which serve largely low income and minority student populations, are getting tremendous success and wonderful results for kids. This should be celebrated. These are fantastic public school options for parents, and long waiting lists show that we have more to do to meet the demands of these schools. And finally, the Chamber has been an active supporter of legislation to increase the transparency of school budgets and require a larger percentage of education dollars to go directly to the classroom.
That's right, Terry. And maybe let me talk a little bit about the coming year and what our priorities are. We have several here. With regard to charter schools, we will continue to support New Mexico's successful charter school environment And that includes making it easier for charter schools to secure facilities. With regard to early childhood programs, we will continue working with the department and the secretary to keep quality at the center of the programs. And then in light of the COVID-19 crisis that we are facing, we want to push for a quick and safe return of our children to rigorous in-person instruction. And then also challenge us to use this pandemic here as an opportunity to encourage innovation in our schools. With regard to measuring our progress, we will continue to advocate for high standards and transparency in our accountability systems. We want to position parents to easily see and tell how their schools are performing. And we want to rush to help struggling students and schools. And finally, we will continue to use the Chamber's Albuquerque Reads program to really help improve literacy among our Title I students.
Peter, thanks for mentioning Albuquerque Reads. Oh, it is a great program. It's a partnership with APS, and ordinarily right now we'd be deploying 300 tutors into elementary schools to provide 90 minutes a week of one-on-one literacy tutoring for kids who need help. We can't do that, of course, this year. So instead, we've adjusted like everyone else has, and we are now providing every kindergartner and first grader at the schools we work with a backpack, school supplies, 20 books to keep and read at home over the course of the year, and new to our program, a lap desk that they can use to do their at-home schoolwork. We also launched ABQ Reads to You initiative. It's been very popular. It's a library of online children's books that are read by business community leaders in Albuquerque. They're on the APS YouTube page. So we're figuring out how to be an engaged, active partner in ensuring kids can learn to read early in their education. All right. That does it for our description of the Chamber's education programs, perspectives, and priorities. We're ready to hear from our speakers.
All right, our first speaker today is Lieutenant Governor Howie Morales. He's an educator himself from Silver City who helped set and lead the state's education policies. He is a graduate from Western New Mexico University and has a PhD in education from New Mexico State. He was a special education teacher and a high school baseball coach before being elected Grand County Clerk and then to the New Mexico State Senate. Lieutenant Governor Morales will speak first, and then we will introduce Secretary Groginski, who will also provide remarks. After both have spoken, we'll open it up to take questions from the attendees. So during their presentations, if you would like to pose a question, please just type it in the Q&A box that you can see on your screen. And we'll try to get to as many of those as we can after the speakers are finished with their presentations. Lieutenant Governor Morales, thanks for being with us, and the floor and the video camera is all yours.
Thank you so much, Peter, and I want to say thank you to the Chamber for allowing me the opportunity to be here and have this wonderful discussion. I am particularly inspired by the combination of public safety, business, economic growth, and the connection with education, because I think for far too long we've seen that there's been one against the other in many aspects when it comes to policy or budgeting. And this is great opportunities that we have, because the reality of it, one can't thrive without the other. And I'm so proud to be part of this. As a matter of fact, myself and Terri were on a Zoom this morning. So it's been nice to spend the day with her and talking about similar issues as we are today. Yeah, I want to just back up a little bit and first say also thank you to the educators across the state of New Mexico. It's a challenge. The work that they've been doing not only has been stressful and overwhelming, it's been tripled on the workload simply because the amount that is needed to plan, to prepare, to deliver a lesson, often through the virtual means that we're doing right now. So I don't want to ever forget the work that they're doing and appreciate every single one of them, as well as the parents. I know that impact because I deal with it every single day, having to do my work as Lieutenant Governor, making sure that we're communicating with our cabinet secretaries, and at the same time, in between Zooms, is ensuring that my own kids are doing their homework and staying on top of things. It's a challenge. And I just want to make sure that we recognize that right from the beginning. My story began early on when you have programs that have been so beneficial to people across the state, not only here in Grant County where I live, but all across the state and the region and the country. I was a Head Start child, and having the opportunity to go and learn how to learn, and the habits that were necessary and so impactful in making education a priority in my life has been something that I'm forever grateful for. Had the federal government not had the Head Start program, I'm not sure that I would have gotten the opportunities in that early stages of life to really understand and really see how education can play such a big factor in what is done throughout a person's life. I come from a large family, and those who have heard me speak before may have heard me share this story, but it's true. My father had 15 brothers and 4 sisters. So I often joked about that of a large family, you can see how easy it was for me to get elected a state senator in the district I served because most of them were related to me. But of that large family, I was blessed to be the first one to go on to college, to earn a college degree and to go into the field of education, where it has made such a big difference, not only for me, but also for those family members who have come after me, who have done so much in regard to education. But when you look and see the pathway that has taken place with education, it's been a journey. And I want to just really focus on the journey aspect of it, because all too often we can get caught up in the race when it comes to education and the competitive piece when it comes to education. And I think all those have somewhat of a factor, but it's the journey that really does make a difference. And right around 1999, I started seeing that there was a change when it came to education. We may be familiar with the then law of No Child Left Behind and the work that was done in that way to really quantify education and somewhat have education be based as a business where the bottom line would be your standardized score. I didn't really like what I was seeing with education. So at that point, I made the decision that if I was going to really have an impact on education policy and give a perspective from the classroom, that I would have to position myself to be in that area where policy is being discussed. So I began on my journey with moving from special education classroom and still being a baseball coach onto working on my doctorate in education. Now this was key because again, it's right around the time frame that we saw No Child Left Behind, which was moving along and soon to be law within the country. It was during that time that I learned a whole lot about what education really is and how it can be transformed. And I truly believe that education doesn't need to be reformed, it needs to be transformed. And education doesn't need to be further standardized, but rather individualized. And I've tried to take that approach in all that I do, because I remember in my first year of teaching, when I was straight out of college, I had an opportunity to teach at the high school that I graduated from. And I never forgot that first message that the educator, the lead educator, taught me. And she shared, even though I was working with students in alternative school who had dropped out of school, who had been behind on credits, who maybe had a child at a young age or were in trouble with the law, I never forgot the message that she shared. And I've carried it with me in any profession that I've been so blessed to be a part of. She shared that society will say, you messed up your bed, so lay in it. But a loving, caring, and compassionate environment will say, you messed up your bed, here, let me help you make it up. And it's that approach that when we look and see what education truly means and the changes that were occurring with No Child Left Behind is why I wanted to make sure that I was going to be in the discussions, in not knowing that I'd be in the legislature one day, but in the area to make sure that we can give a feedback and an honest dialogue of what should be taking place. So little did I know that even though I ran for county clerk, and specifically why I chose the office of county clerk as my first elected office, was because it gave me the opportunity to not only get an understanding of government, know how it is to run, to win a campaign, but also to still be connected with students, because that's at the heart of what I do. So utilizing the opportunity to engage students with the voting process, teaching them about the importance of voting, getting into the schools, using our voting machines so they can vote for their homecoming king or queen or their class president or other offices like that. And it was a wonderful start. But little did I know in 2008, upon the passing of the great senator, longtime state senator, Ben Altamirano, that I would be appointed in that position to start my career in the Senate. And the discussions that took place, I think, were well timed, because even though we may not have always seen eye to eye or been in agreement, I think that it was established that respect was always going to be there. And I can remember many committee hearings being there where possibly Terri stood up for one piece of legislation and I stood up in opposition to it. We've always been able to maintain that communication, that dialogue, and that pathway to find what we can do as a state to improve our education system. So I'm so grateful that that has been a part of our journey and my work with the Greater Albuquerque Chamber of Commerce. As we discuss more policies that have been in place, I think one area that has made a huge difference for me and the role that I now serve in Lieutenant Governor is the willingness to have stood up and to voice my concerns, to do it in a way that was going to make sure that we looked at education, not again as a quantitative measure where we were just going to see what the standardized score said, but we were going to look at education in a holistic way. And during my time within the Senate, I did have a chance, because it was tough to be a superintendent or a principal and be gone so much as I was from the legislature or for the legislature. I didn't think that was fair to students. I didn't think that was fair to parents. So I left the education classroom and went on and became a hospital administrator. And that was one of the best experiences that I could have ever had when it relates to education, because healthcare and healing are so very much parallel to healthcare. And I'll give you an example. If you go in and you have a person who's in the hospital and who's been treated for their ailment, you can give them medication and hope to help them with their physical ailment. That's going to go a long way in helping with that area. But if you go in and treat that person, not as a patient in room so-and-so, but as a person in that room that you can communicate with, and that you treat not only the physical ailment, with the medication being consistent with instruction, but with the holistic approach where you treat them mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally, socially, and of course, the physical aspect. You're going to have true learning, long-lasting learning, and then those relationships that are built. So that has always stood with me in the discussions of how we can transform our education system. What we do know is that there's strategies that do work. And we know that when we look and see some policies that have been passed in the past that have been used, such as grading the schools, A through F, I think that was an easy way to see where a school was at, give them a letter grade, and then try to tell a whole story of how that school's performing. I had concerns with that, and that was one of the pieces of legislation that I would stand up in opposition to, because I knew that education was a lot more than the heavy weight that would be put on a simple standardized test. I believe 86% at the elementary school and 90% at the high school. And I think when you look and see all that takes place within a classroom is a lot more than what's measured in that area. I had concerns also at the time when there was the evaluation system that was passed. And I think that rightly so, the argument was all the current evaluation system that was used in the past was allowing too many proficiency scores to go through and to be passed. And educators would go year to year without having the full instruction or the full opportunity to improve their profession. I saw that there was an opportunity there to come together and find a way that we could have an evaluation system that was going to be fair and not drive educators out of the system as what we see right now. I think working together, we found a system that'll work, and I think it'll really elevate the education profession and bring down the vacancy rate that we've seen because of the harmful impacts of an evaluation system that was too heavily based on the standardized tests. But I think also my arguments and my discussions at that point was we, for far too long, were focused on student proficiency and student achievement. Now, student proficiency is determined, you set your proficiency levels. A lot of times that could be set because of politics. And you lower proficiency score if you want to show just how well your student and your systems are doing, or you can higher the proficiency scores and you can show that there's some deficiencies that are there. But I feel that all too often while we were chasing student proficiency and student achievement, what we missed was the opportunity to look at student engagement. And we look at our own stories and see what motivates us, what drives us. It's that opportunity for engagement to have students be involved in what it is that they want to learn. And an example of that is you look back at a school yearbook, any high school yearbook from 1960s or 1970s, you'll see how thick that yearbook is because there was so many clubs, so many opportunities for engagement, so many things that help make this country the greatest country in the world. But if you look at a yearbook from recent years and you see how thin that yearbook is, it's because what has happened is those opportunities for engagement have been shrunk because the focus has been get as many classes in math and science or math and reading as possible. And I absolutely agree that we need to stay committed to the STEM. But I also want to make sure that not all students may be going in the pathway of a four-year college degree. Students may go into the areas of automotive, carpentry, electrician, plumbing, all part of those processes and all part of those plans to get a well-civilized and well-rounded society. These are the type of things that I'll continue to push for. And as your Lieutenant Governor, it has been a wonderful opportunity to work together with state agencies, to work together with organizations such as yours, to come together to find solutions where we find similarities, rather than looking at things that may divide us. That is one thing that I'll continue to work towards and continually look forward to other innovative ideas of what we can do as a state, because we do hear often that where our state rankings are and how we must improve. I want to keep that analogy in mind that we can go in and we can improve the ailment by giving the pill of instruction, or we can improve the potential of where we're at by looking at the whole child and looking at the whole system. That is what I'm committed to and look forward to continue working with each of these organizations, especially from the business side of it, to make sure that we have a consistent approach that's going to ask to ensure that we have our opportunity to reach our full potential rather than just merely reaching a goal. I also want to say thank you. I know that Secretary Groginski will be presenting after me, and I want to say thank you for her expertise and the energy that she's brought forward, because that is a tremendous start and move forward of how we can align our education system to be in collaboration rather than opposition. And I share that from a personal perspective because one of the things that I learned early on in my Senate career was when we hit the recession back in 2010 and 2011. And it was a real eye-opener for me, simply because I was there as a finance member, and advocates of early childhood, K-12, and higher ed, and even adult basic education would come and they'd ask me, I know we have to have cuts to the budget, but please, if at all possible, please don't cut us. And my response as a finance member would say, okay, can you give me some suggestions or ideas where we can cut to balance our budget? And all too often, the answer that came back said, it doesn't matter, just don't cut us. And at that point, I made the commitment that I will not separate early childhood, K-12, higher ed, and adult basic education to be in opposition of one another. If we're going to have fully functioning systems, they need to be working together in that collaborative approach. So I'm grateful that we have Secretary Groginski here, and just a little bit of a background of how that came about. In 2015, 2016 time, I was there in the Finance Committee, and at the time, Secretary of CYFD, Monique Jacobson, was presenting to us at no fault of her own. She was brand new. She had left from Tourism Department into our CYFD agency. And she had to present to us at the finance side of it, why the state had to turn back 22 million of federal dollars because they went unexpended. Now, this is a state who consistently ranks at the lowest when it comes to child well-being and child's quality of life. And I asked the question, how can this be? How can we not expend these funds? And it immediately came to light that what took place was that we had early childhood education that was spread out over 5 agencies: Public Education Department, Higher Education Department, CYFD, Human Service Department, and the Workforce Solutions Department. So while these other efforts were being made in different agencies, it was easy to see that early childhood was just a component of that, not the focus. And fortunately, even though there was some defeats for the next 2 to 3 years with my legislation, we were fortunate that Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham made that one of her cornerstones of our administration, and making sure that we were going to put the full weight of the executive behind that, with wonderful sponsors like Senator Michael Padilla and Representative Linda Trujillo, with wonderful advocates like Terri and others from the Chamber of Commerce across the state that didn't see this as an opportunity to increase government, but rather as an opportunity to streamline it. And I think by streamlining that approach is what you're going to see, that there's going to be beneficial opportunities for us to move forward in this state and start at the most critical stages of a child's life. I look forward to that potential, and I look forward to the possibilities that we have in working in collaboration with our systems, because let's be clear, we have a long way to go. And we know that this pandemic has done a lot of damage to our education system. But before we go in and we start to jump in and say how we can provide that field of instruction, what we can do to build up that student, to build up that child, whatever their emotional needs are, and to know that we can not only attain our potential, but we can surpass it. I'm confident in that. In no way do I ever advocate lowering the bar. We have to increase that bar and the kids will reach that. I know that as a coach, that was always the goal. Make sure you shoot for the very top, for that state championship level every single year. And they would attain that. They would reach that. Maybe fall short once in a while, but they would reach that. The same approach goes for education. Keep the standards, keep the bars high enough to make sure that we're consistently improving, but at the same time, provide the resources, provide the policies, and provide the support that's needed to make sure that it is attainable and it's realistic. I look forward to more discussion. I look forward for the opportunity to listen to each one of you and to answer the questions, and look forward to also using this time as a learning opportunity for me, how we can look at education from a different point of view and different angles. So thank you so much for this opportunity to share a little bit about my perspective of education, and look forward to further discussion.
Terri, you're on mute again.
Sorry. So thank you very much, Lieutenant Governor Morales. I remember that Senate Finance Committee meeting. You take me down memory lane there for a moment, and I do remember your comments, and I thought that meeting might be the beginning of your effort, and it was, and we were delighted to work with you and to support you in that endeavor and to support our governor. So again, to our attendees, if you have any questions, please drop them in the Q&A box on your screen. And as soon as our next presenter finishes, we'll ask several questions of the Lieutenant Governor and the Secretary. Our next speaker is Secretary Elizabeth Groginski, the first leader of the state's new Early Childhood Education and Care Department. She previously served as Assistant Superintendent of Early Learning in Washington, D.C., and has more than 2 decades of executive experience administering public and private human service organizations. Washington, D.C. was the first in the nation in 2009 to pursue universal pre-K, and today has the highest U.S. participation rate, 85% of 4-year-olds and 75% of 3-year-olds. She also previously directed early childhood education for United Way worldwide, and was the first executive director of Early Childhood Data Collaborative. Her master's degree is in social sciences from the University of Colorado at Denver, and she has a bachelor's degree from the University of Maryland. Secretary, we hope you're enjoying our beautiful state, and we're thankful that you've taken on the task of overseeing all our various early childhood programs. I appreciated all the early meetings I was in with you and was so very impressed with your competency and your energy and your accessibility. So welcome, take it away.
Thank you, Terri. Thank you to the chamber, and a great thank you to Lieutenant Governor Morales, who has been a big supporter and champion. I think it was about a year ago, we were all at the governor's residence when I had just arrived to take on this new appointment, which has been incredible. What an honor and a privilege to serve the great state of New Mexico and this incredible administration. So I am going to share my next slide. Let's hope that it worked earlier. Hold on. There we go. So I want to provide a little bit of an agency overview where we are to date. It was great to have that recap from the Lieutenant Governor of how we got to where we are today. Share a little bit about how we have been responding as a new department to COVID-19. I'm really pleased to have our Assistant Secretary for Native American Early Education and Care, Giovanna Archuleta, with us to give you a little preview of what's going to happen on Wednesday with our government to government convening, early care and education, public education department, and higher education department, the key themes that we're going to be bringing forward with our sovereign nations and our tribal partners on Wednesday. And then I'm going to end with just giving you some key themes that we're seeing as we have developed here. We're almost 6 months old as a department, not quite, and really learning a lot, and want to share with you what themes we're seeing and engage you and your incredible support for this work moving forward. So as you all know, we launched on July 1st. It was the beginning. It was, of course, not what all of us expected. We wanted to be together in a big room with balloons and confetti and celebrating this historic moment, not only for New Mexico, but really for the nation. We are one of only 4 cabinet level agencies focused on this prenatal to 5 period of life. But it was truly collaborative. The governor, the lieutenant governor joined us. We had tribal leadership initiating the new department with a prayer and early childhood advocates. There were over 500 people on our Zoom call. Hopefully many of you were there. We had op-eds nationally and locally. And so a lot of people cheering us on, and it was really tremendous. So we were excited, and we said, we've got a lot of work to do. So not only what's in Senate Bill 22, but just really the work that has gone into the early childhood system in New Mexico over the last 10 to 15 years is tremendous. We did an amazing needs assessment of the entire state led by the New Mexico Early Childhood Development Partnership. Thousands of people were interviewed, surveyed, and that document actually lives on our website in both Spanish and English. It's over 300 pages. So really encourage folks to enjoy that and dig in to see what the kind of data we have on our communities, on our families, on our children, on our workforce. But that work helped us really solidify what we have to do. And that is to create more cohesion and more equity across our state. When we think about families, they first get the news that a baby is coming into their life. What is it that we're doing, and how are we making sure that they know what services and programs are available? And if they are not able to, I think as Lieutenant Governor was sharing, if they're not able to provide some of those supports, how do we as communities come around these families with young children and really provide that nurture and support that they need? So thinking about the richness that we have in this state of culture and language, building that, working that into our system, and supporting our early childhood professionals. The research is clear, and this is where quality happens. When we have early childhood professionals who know their field, are experts in their field, are well supported and well credentialed and well compensated, we know that all of our New Mexico families are going to have the kind of access that we all want for them and they want for themselves and their children to these high quality services. This is good, I think, for a chamber meeting to know how do we organize ourselves and how do we conduct our business. So this gives you a nice organizational overview. In my office, I have an amazing Chief General Counsel, Kate Gerard. Some of you may know her. And then we have an executive secretary who supports the office. Assistant Secretary Archuleta, as I mentioned earlier, we have elevated the Head Start State Collaboration Office under the Assistant Secretary because we know the important role and the partnership that we need to have as a department with our Head Start partners, both tribal and non-tribal. And so Olga, who serves as our Head Start Collaboration Coordinator, works closely with the New Mexico Head Start Association. We meet with them monthly. There's a lot of information exchange, joint planning, and that's an exciting part of our new organizational structure. In addition, within the department, we have identified tribal liaisons in every one of the program areas you see listed below in the black lettering. There are 8 tribal liaisons. They meet regularly with the assistant secretary. They also all meet regularly with our tribal education leaders. And it's a learning process, but it's also building towards partnership and really building that trust and understanding so that we can do even a deeper alignment and deeper work and support with our tribal education partners, our tribal partners, not just education, but we've started with our education leaders. And then we have an incredible Deputy Secretary, Jennifer Duran-Salee, who oversees the Chief Information Officer, all of our Budget Administrative Services Director, Administrative Law Judge, and our Communications Director. We have two main programmatic organizational divisions. Family Support and Early Intervention is led by Mayra Acevedo, and this is where we begin early. This is the prenatal to 3 up to 5 with our home visiting. Families First, which is a perinatal case management program focused on getting families connected to outcome-based interventions very early in the process and supporting moms through that postpartum and making sure all the screenings, well-child visits, and the checks for mom and dad as well are also taking place. And then Family, Infant, and Toddler program, which is our early intervention program for infants and toddlers with developmental delays and disabilities, or who are at risk of having developmental disabilities. So something I don't have a lot of slides on this, but I want to say during the pandemic, we moved all home visiting, all these programs to telehealth right away. It was incredible. I think it was through July, we had enrolled, we did presumptive eligibility for children. We had enrolled, I think it was 1,700 infants and toddlers, beginning in March when the pandemic, all the way up through July. Families were able to get access to supports and services, and over half of those children were under the age of 1. So this is what we want to see. We're starting early. We're really looking to engage families as early as possible. So good news on that. We have not lost ground during the pandemic. Early care education and nutrition. Most of you, many of you may be familiar with Alejandra Ribeiro Rey, who is the director there. They have a huge job, all the child care assistance, regulation and oversight, and both public and private pre-K. So we have all the funding for the public pre-K. We work very collaboratively with public education department, and then the money is sent back to public education department and distributed to the public schools. And then we have family nutrition. So all the food programs, all the meals to you, everything that has been happening both through the child and adult care food program, as well as the summer service food program is all happening through that division. And then we have policy research and quality initiatives led by Claire Dudley Chavez, who many of you are probably familiar with. And she leads the policy and planning. She has a data assessment and research team, and then all the quality initiatives. So this would be the focus work, the consultation, scholarships, all the workforce development, and then all of our plans, lots of reports and data that we need to provide to different constituents on a regular basis. So this is an overview of how we're organized and how we set about doing our work with a focus on continuous quality improvement. I want to echo what the Lieutenant Governor said. We are here to transform the prenatal to 5 system. Well, I guess we have to create it and transform it at the same time. But I often tell the staff, every system is perfectly designed to get the results that it gets. And we see that our early childhood system is not getting the results we want for all children in New Mexico, especially our Hispanic children, our Native American children, African American children. We know we can do better. And so this is the way our organization is structured to help us achieve those goals. In addition to having this organizational structure, we of course are fortunate to have the Children's Cabinet instituted under our administration. And so they are a key part of it, working with Mariana Padilla, the director of the Children's Cabinet, on all the cabinet secretaries, on strategies, on collaboration, looking at how we can be more efficient and effective with the resources that we have. We also are starting in the process of our Senate Bill 22 requires a 4-year finance plan for the department to establish and then update that annually. So we have a number of projects underway, and we have a team working internally and we'll of course engage our stakeholders, because Senator Padilla asks me about it whenever I see him. So, but it's a really important part because it's getting to that, what's the big number? We think we have a very large budget. I'll speak about that in a little bit, but we know it's not enough to meet the needs that we have for families and young children. Again, the Preschool Development Grant Early Childhood Needs Assessment has been an incredible tool to engage, for me, especially coming new to the state, to learn about the different parts of the state, the different assets and strengths that different parts of our state have in terms of communities, resources, and a lot of the plans. If you look in that document, you'll see all the plans that have been done, different reports that have been developed. Where does New Mexico stand or sit in comparison to other states? So really encourage you all to take a look at that needs assessment document. And then we have strategic partners. Senate Bill 22 called for the establishment of the ECECD Advisory Council. We put out an invitation right before the pandemic broke. We had over 300 people from across the state apply. They said, we want to be part of this. This is an advisory council that's helping us think about the wage and career compensation ladder for early childhood professionals, and also about how are we going to measure the performance of this new cabinet level agency? What is it that it's going to be important for us to be paying attention to say, yes, this department has been a success. So that was fantastic. We ended up appointing 40 people from around the state. We had people representing all different parts of the system, home visiting, higher education, K-12, families, other educators, and they just wrapped up their last meetings and a report is being finalized for the legislature and the governor. We also just actually Saturday had a meeting of the Indian Education Advisory Council advises our department as well, and the Early Learning Advisory Council that has been established here in New Mexico for many years. I also was fortunate, the Hunt Institute reached out to us to say, can we help you as you set up this new department? And the Lieutenant Governor was very generous, and the Secretary of State, Maggie Toulouse Oliver, and said that they would be willing to co-chair a transition committee. We had Rob Black sitting on there, helping represent business community and other business leaders, legislators from the Senate and the House, Republican and Democrat, and we had also members of the Children's Cabinet and the Governor's Office, Mariana Padilla. So it was a great group. That report is forthcoming, another 18-month action report. And the good news is, and when I get to the themes, a lot of the things coming out of these different bodies, we're seeing some really good themes coming from different levels, different perspectives, different knowledge base, but everyone is kind of coalescing around some of these key themes that we're pretty excited about. And then of course, the Pritzker Children's Initiative that we have received, we're one of 24 states, I think, that received $1 million from this national foundation. And the New Mexico Early Childhood Development Partnership is the lead. They're the fiscal agent, but it's a public-private partnership. And that steering committee has a policy agenda, very much aligned with our agenda around prenatal to 3. So more to come on that, but you can see these are the voices, the perspectives, the guiding voices that we're coming together and really coalescing to set a strong foundation for the new department. So a lot of the things, as you all as business people know, you're starting a new venture, you're starting a new corporation, a new organization, you want to be successful. And so the first priority was really integrating all these different programs and systems from public education department, children, youth and families, and the Department of Health. And we know that, they have different ways that they do HR, different ways they do budgeting, different ways they handle a lot of different parts of their thing. So really building an organizational culture at ECECD that has core values. These are some of the core values that have come to light. We're in the process right now with the department staff, getting that consensus around what our core values will be. But we definitely want to operate with the highest level of transparency, build the trust, think about the equity at all times. What does that mean for us as a department? We're going to create an equity council that's going to advise us as a department, because we know that it's important when you're going to go out and do that work, you have to start with yourself. So we start with ourselves and as a department, and then we're going to build that out across the state. We want to be a recognizable brand. Sometimes I'm in meetings, people still refer to CYFD pre-K, CYFD home visiting. And so we're really, we have a logo, we have some other good materials, collateral materials, but we know that this is a work in progress, and we look forward to getting more feedback from others, but making sure people recognize it, feel confident of that brand, and understand what it is that we're communicating, and really communicating the importance and value of this prenatal to 5 period of life. And that is going to be through, again, active consultation and collaboration, engaging our communities and our internal staff at ECECD, because there are a lot of program requirements. We have about 5 federal agencies, I think it's 4 or 5 federal agencies that we report to. And then we have a lot of the state So we want to make sure wherever possible, we can reduce barriers and increase access and create more, because people don't have to figure out what's this requirement, what's that requirement, that it's more aligned and cohesive, especially for families, but also for the educators and the professionals who are working in the field. You covered this earlier. You all, thank you so much for getting us the trust fund, for helping be part of that advocacy movement, and to the governor and the lieutenant governor. This has been tremendous. This type of fund allows us to be planful. We can think now about all these strategies, and we can know that in 22, we're going to get 20 million. Every year after that, we'll get 30 million or 5% of the fund, whichever is greater. So this is a place where also other people, grants, other appropriations, things can be put into this fund to ensure the future of generations have access to quality programs. So here you'll see just a look, you can see our federal funds are 37% of our revenue streams, but the other transfers also are primarily federal funds. That's TANF, that's Medicaid to support our program. So overall, a little under 50% of our budget comes from the general fund, and of our $420 million budget, over 50% of it is federally funded. This gives you just a look at how the different programs are funded and how much money goes into them. And you can see clearly childcare is a huge part of that expense. And that is because, of course, that we're serving, in our ideal state, we'd be serving 22,000 families, full day, full year access to childcare. But right now in the pandemic, we have lost, we are way under enrolled, but that's the largest part of our budget. But you can see there that public and private pre-K are equally funded. And then we have a little bit from Families First, Families Nutrition. So this is a lot of information on one slide, which is probably not a good PowerPoint, but the good news here is that, as you know, Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham set a priority to expand access to public pre-K. And given that we were talking about education today, and although we know education begins prenatally, and I wanted to just celebrate with all of you the fact that in this last budget year, we moved a lot of our half-day publicly funded pre-K to full day. Over 2,371 slots were converted. And that was a big priority too of our administration, not just to expand access to more pre-K, which we did. We also increased access in public school to more full day. We did make those conversions, and we increased also access in community-based organizations to almost 2,000 additional students. So this is the funding. It's a great program that the recent LFC report that came out showed almost a $6 return for every dollar invested. So we know through continued investments and targeted investments to make sure that all of these settings are as the highest quality they can be, we're going to see incredible returns for New Mexico. Workforce development, we can't do this work without our incredible educators. So we have a scholarship program. Love your help promoting that. We want to make sure that anybody working in early childhood, so this is not just for our preschool or childcare, also home visitors, people working in early intervention, that they can access our early childhood scholarship program. We also have a wage supplement program that has not been used as much as we would have liked to see. We did, however, though, through the COVID-19 response, issue a wage incentive, wage supplement program, and we reached over 3,000 educators who continued to work in childcare centers during the, when a lot of other programs were closed and people couldn't continue to work. So we were grateful to them and were able to provide that support. So you can see here, we did have a $2.4 million increase in this area for FY21. So continuing to promote this, make sure our educators are getting on their pathway to increasing their credentials, having more opportunities to learn about the child development and continue to increase their degrees. This is a great picture of some of our home visitors who are making some deliveries to families. I think this might have been part, I don't know if this was part of the infant wellness packages, but a lot of in the early days, we were just incredible. The team, people pulling wherever was a need, there was somebody in the early childhood community who was willing to step up and go help meet those needs. And that includes the staff at ECECD and all of our professionals working around the state. So these were just some of the ways the new department, and this started in March, started supporting the early childhood community. And that included, again, everything from the personal protective equipment to something very signature that our governor wanted to make sure that any childcare professional working who contracted COVID and did not have health insurance would have access to the medical insurance pool through the state of New Mexico, as would their family, to help support them through recovery. So this was great. She prioritized childcare professionals from day one and said we need to support them. I mentioned the wage incentive program. We also saw many of our businesses were struggling because of the decreased parents coming and decreased revenues. So we initiated a stabilization and recovery grant program, and we issued grants last month to over 500 businesses, childcare businesses across the state. We paid differentials, and we had incredible COVID safe practices. Through the Governor's Economic Recovery Council, we convened leading experts in the field in both health, members of the Economic Recovery Council, and in early childhood businesses, and they helped us develop COVID safe practices that are very rigorous and very challenging to implement. So I echo the Lieutenant Governor's gratitude towards our educators and our professionals who are doing things they never imagined and having to do it in just a moment's notice, having to change the way they do business, but they've done a great job. And while we've seen continued rapid responses, and I'll speak a little bit about that, overall, childcare is a very, very safe place for children and staff. Once public education departments started moving into remote hybrid, we partnered with the public education department on a contract to help support and broker some of the relationships between school districts and childcare partners and other partners in the community, so that families would have options who had to continue to work and were not able to stay home to support the remote hybrid learning. And then just continued communication with the provider community. At first, we did daily calls for about maybe 3 weeks or a month, and then we went to once a week. We tried to go to every other week, but now we're back to once a week, because it seems like a really important touch point for us to always come back together and say, what more did we learn? What do we know about what's happening? What other information do we need to share? We've had the Secretary of McCamley from Workforce Solutions, Secretary Alicia Keys talking about economic development opportunities. We've had Secretary Kunkel, former Secretary Kunkel. We've had, I don't know if we've had Secretary Stewart, but we've had a lot of the secretaries or their staff come on and share information. And it's a dialogue. It's a two-way conversation that we have every week with the community. To support families, immediately we used our CARES funding to offer free childcare for essential workers. And we served almost 1,600 families, maybe a little more. We launched a summer pre-K Jumpstart program. We waived parent co-payments in the early days. We have now since done that again, September, October, November, December. We'll continue to monitor that. And then we issued emergency regulations so that we could expand eligibility for childcare to postgraduate students. We didn't realize our regs didn't allow that, but also to clarify telework and online coursework and allow job search. So before we did these emergency regulations, if you did not already have a childcare contract and lost your job, you would not be eligible to receive childcare assistance. So that was an important change that we were able to make. And then again, continued to partner with the PED on responding to a statewide family survey on childcare needs. And we initiated a family, friend, and neighbor childcare program. So people who may not be able to stay home, but have a wonderful relative, a wonderful friend who's nearby, and they need to be able to pay them. We did a temporary family, friend, and neighbor, which has been pretty popular. I think we've done about 80 or 86 of those around the state. In terms of surveillance and rapid response, I just want to share this because I think it's important to know how incredible the New Mexico early childhood, the childcare community has been during this pandemic. As business leaders, you know, people can't come to work, they can't attend to tasks, they can't be productive if they don't have access to childcare. And so what they have done in order to ensure that, and our governor has been very strong, that childcare needs to be right at the forefront of who we're supporting. Their staff are getting tested every 2 weeks. They're using these COVID safe practices, and they know exactly what to do when there is a positive case. They know how to communicate with families. They know who has to quarantine and who has to isolate. And they now understand the process for what happens when they need to go on a watch list or a shutdown. And we've just recently released some documents showing families, this is what your early childhood educators are doing every day. Please help them keep your children and your staff safe in this relationship we have, because we need our childcare industry to survive this COVID pandemic. We need, we've lost 11 permanent facilities who have permanently closed, and we're at about 81% open. So some are still saying they're temporarily closed, but this is a real concern. And that's why the increased focus and investment in time on such an important industry that is there to protect the health and safety of our children and nurture them. But it's also key to our economic engine, as we know that we need to have people going back to work and being in places. If they don't have childcare, we're going to be challenged. So now I just want to turn it over to our Assistant Secretary, first ever here in New Mexico, first in the nation. She's getting a lot of great and exposure, but really happy to introduce her here today to Giovanna Archuleta.
Hello, everyone. Like Secretary Groginski said, we are 6 months old, a stage in development where our babies are just learning their environments, their relationships, and just making their presence known, much like our new department. As we go into our government to government this coming Wednesday, I just want to say that we will be in with Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham and Lieutenant Governor Morales, where we really support his vision of, that continued approach, that alignment of working with our Assistant Secretary Lashana So from the Indian Education Division, working with Higher Ed and the Acting Cabinet Secretary Stephanie Rodriguez, in putting this government to government, because we do think that we start at birth. Our education starts at birth. And so we need to make sure we have thriving children and youth and adults. So some of the initiatives that we have done is, like Secretary said, we expanded access to early pre-K and pre-K. We strengthened our partnerships with Head Start. We've invested in some programs like the Waterford Upstart that Senator Mimi Stewart introduced to us, and our tribal communities really appreciate this program. We've launched the pre-K summer Jumpstart, as Secretary said. We've really listened to the voices and spent our past Saturday with the Indian Education Advisory Council. We've identified the tribal liaisons, and we established our biweekly tribal communications, which we have tomorrow with our tribal education directors. And that's just to keep them up to date and really learn from their guidance as well. As far as workforce development, we do have a current cohort going through SIPI at the moment, the Southwest Polytechnic Institute. We partnered with CNM, and I just got off a call this morning with the American Indian College Fund to look at how we support other tribal universities and scholarships for our population. We're investing in some local indigenous knowledge systems. So through UNM, through language immersion, we purchased an online learning platform, so Quorum, which our tribal communities are also taking advantage of. And like Secretary said, we increased higher education. We partnered with the Indian Affairs Department just to look at tribal priorities in early childhood education. And some of the common themes are always the preservation of language and culture, and facility assessments and workforce development, all of which we are tackling. That's my nephew, by the way. Some social and emotional support is access to quality services. So our programs have remained open so our children can have those ongoing interaction with their peers and their education, early educators. We expanded access to evidence home visiting. We did deliver infant wellness packages to all tribes across the state. So that came with onesies and books and food, just depending on the age. If they had little teeth, it just depends what food they got. We have an infant early childhood mental health task force that is currently going on, and I actually had to miss my meeting to be with you all. So stay tuned for the strategic plan. And we've launched the Moments Together campaign. So I hope you all got to see that. It's been on our local channels and in our newspapers.
Thank you, Assistant Secretary Archuleta. That was wonderful. So we're going to close, and that's her beautiful daughter and husband there. We have our wonderful slides. These are the themes that keep coming up for us as ECECD, and that is, most importantly, we need to grow investments. While we saw that there was a good amount of money there, and we have the trust fund, we need to be really maximizing federal, local, state dollars. And we need to do that through a couple ways. One, we've already submitted an $8 million grant to the Office of Head Start to expand access to hopefully 400 infants and toddlers here in the state of New Mexico. Stay tuned. We hope to hear here by the end of the year. For sure, we'll know right after the first of the year. But those are the kind of opportunities we have to keep our eyes on. We also have to look at how we can grow investments by just being smarter and more efficient and effective across our state agencies and internally to our own department. Clearly, advancing a diverse and well compensated and credentialed workforce is absolutely essential to achieving all these other important things. So with those additional dollars, we need to be looking at how are we supporting educators in advancing their credentials, in building towards their pathway and making those pathways realistic. We have all these different programs, and the great thing about New Mexico, our higher education institutions are so well aligned and so collaborative. With this kind of focus, we can make this happen. Achieving equity. These are things that we want to see how we can diversify our decision-making, including funding, to bring in more local communities into our planning and implementation. We know that there are so many unique aspects of different parts of New Mexico that without that local engagement and investment in our decision-making and how we decide funding, that will be hard to achieve without that. So that's a commitment we're making. And then in terms of increasing quality and access, really embracing a family-driven, holistic focus. We need to be thinking about their health, their education, their development, their overall well-being. And that is really important. That keeps coming up in all these different settings and all these different conversations. And then target investments to make sure that we're equitably expanding access to quality for all families. And then finally, but not last, but not least, is the enhancing the authentic collaboration. And you've heard a little bit about it in this presentation today, whether it's internal with our tribal liaisons or looking horizontally and vertically across our organization, or just working more collaboratively with other state structures. This has to be part of this new department's work going forward and be built into our plans and our actions moving forward. With that, I will turn it back. I'm just grateful for all the time and appreciate to be able to share where we've come in our first 6 months.
Thank you all three of you for your presentation and interesting perspectives. We got quite a bit of time for Q&A. Kyle is going to help me a little bit with the Q&A, but maybe let me kick it off here. So first, also Secretary, Assistant Secretary, congratulations. I think what you've been able to build in such a short time, I think it's very exciting and encouraging to see. And before our call here, you talked a bit about the challenges of starting this up and doing this in COVID. And I really appreciate you talking a little bit about the emotional stress of your team. I think it takes courage to do that. And I want you to know that, look, the business community is faced with exactly the same. And I think the more we can talk openly about it and generate insights, we can then create a better future when hopefully soon the pandemic is behind us. So thank you for doing that. And you're not alone. Maybe let me kick it off with one question here. Lieutenant Governor, you talked about the holistic approach to measuring success and the importance of student engagement. And I think we all recognize at the end of the day, we want our kids to find joy in learning and ultimately find their passion in life, right? So there's a lot of good research being done in social and emotional development. Can you maybe talk a bit more about how you think about incorporating that into an accountability system and how we can leverage that?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, as I appreciate listening to the secretary and the assistant secretary with the wonderful information that they presented, and I share that because I think when you look and see the potential of learning and seeing how things can be evaluated or they can see the effectiveness, it really does start at the youngest ages and the opportunity to really look forward to see what we can do to help the brain and the connections that are made with that. So I've always advocated that we got to keep in mind the aspect of how the human develops and what takes place there. And so while there's many times a rush that will happen to want the child to read at the earliest possible stages, the reality of it, the brain chemistry just isn't made up like that. And utilizing play therapy or opportunity for play within the learning aspect is so critical at those youngest stages. But when you look and see how we want to evaluate that, what do we want to do to incorporate it with the system that's going to give us an accountability. And I just want to just keep in mind that accountability is a gift. Accountability isn't something that should be used as a punitive measure, but rather a gift to improve. And I think from those lenses, it gives us the opportunity of what we can do and really evaluating how a school system is doing, how a classroom with that educator, what they're doing, and looking to see the potential that we have. We can see that right now during COVID. And even if we want to put that into an accountability measure, we're going to learn about what happened right now during this pandemic across the country and across the world. We're going to see a lot of research that comes out to show what that impact was by taking away those student engagement opportunities. It wasn't that the engagement opportunities were taken away by anybody who wanted to advocate for that. It was simply because of what COVID has done. So in New Mexico, give a perfect example, the impact that we see when you look and see the depression, anxiety, even the potential that you've seen for suicide that may be on the rise. That is a key component and really attributed to students not having that engaged opportunity to want to succeed and want to do what is interest of them. And so I look forward to continually bringing forward that. But even on the evaluation system dashboard that replaced the A through F grading system, there is that component in there that shows the student engagement activity piece of it. And I think that is a much better indicator than what we saw again is when you have a standardized test score that can show that this is what's taking place in the classroom. The reality of it, it really falls short of what actually is taking place, not only in the classroom, but in the whole classroom setting. So in that dashboard right there, I think is a good indication. Unfortunately, it's right in the early stages simply because this was put into effect last year. Things have been changed completely when it comes to COVID and seeing where that goes. But it's the potential of seeing where we're at, how we can learn from this, and how we can ensure that student engagement piece is part of every single thing we do, whether it's in the early childhood stages or at the collegiate level, making sure that that's a component in those accountability measures.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor.
All right, Peter, I've got a couple of questions here that have been submitted by the audience. And again, if people want to submit questions, just please hit that Q&A button and we will get those out. But first, a question for Secretary Groginski, and it has to do with your longer term measurements for success. And congratulations on getting the infrastructure in place in a very short time. And I know the state is obviously all in on early childhood with the amount of money that came in from the excess from last year's budget into the trust to fund that corpus. And we're in the chamber was behind that, and we're all for you. But looking forward, how do you measure success? And I know that may come 8, 10, 12, 18 years out, but ultimately, what would you like to see?
Thank you, Kyle, for that question. And it's such an important question. I have one thing that we know we absolutely want to see is we want to see increased access. So especially to programs that families and children have not had access to. And we think in some ways there's things we can do without additional money, but we don't want to say that too much. But even we've gone through this emergency rulemaking. There are things that we can do to reduce administrative burden, reduce barriers to families actually accessing care. So we know that that is really, really critical, especially at the youngest ages. when we know this window of learning and development is so rapid and so critical. And so I think our next priority is really seeing our workforce, making sure that workforce is representative of the children they serve. This includes bilingual education, multilingual development. We put a priority in our Early Head Start grant to get 50 AA graduated bilingual educators coming through serving our infants and toddlers. So we want to measure success in terms of things that we know really work, and that is investing in our workforce. So seeing more credentialed, more a well-compensated workforce, and more families accessing these important services very early. So we want to see more infants and toddlers coming into the FIT program, under the age of 1. The sooner that we can work together. And then I would say the third thing is really this collaborative structure where we have excellent mechanisms for receiving and getting feedback. I love what the Lieutenant Governor is saying. How do we know that we're doing well if we don't have good metrics? So we've been doing a lot of system mapping and really understanding how do all these different programs and services actually measure themselves. So I think being really keen to our infrastructure development and making sure that we can bring those metrics forward to the chamber, to the legislators, to the governor. So.
Okay, thank you. And I know you're much better at this, but I assume third grade reading levels and different metrics like that you'll establish later on. Even
yes, kindergarten
one of
entry.
our questions actually. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I said kindergarten entry, like that period of time when they're moving into the kindergarten, into the pre-K. Into the K-12 system. Yes, thank you for raising that.
Yes, and graduation rates and that sort of thing, I'm sure. And even, one of our questions has to do with education, and some of our criminal statistics go hand in hand in some way. So hopefully we'll be able to have some sort of crime measurements at some point as to the success.
If I could just add, Kyle, to that, because I think you're raising really excellent points to that need for us to have better data. And I know that state is working on an HHS 2020 system, but we know from research that when families with young children, especially those who are most vulnerable, have access to high quality settings, we get those better results. And so we want to make sure that we're able to measure those outcomes or create those environments that we know get those outcomes, both short-term and long-term. So thank you for raising those.
Okay, thank you.
Kyle, if I may, I just appreciate that, because I know that was a topic of discussion a few years back as far as appropriate reading levels at a third grade, and particularly that going into the fourth grade and the tests that were coming there. I did advocate then, and I still advocate now, is that intervention is far better than retention. So going back at the efforts of what could be done at the earlier stages to have all possible interventions in place at the pre-K part of it, the kindergarten side, and to make sure that's done. And you're exactly right. I think it points to this whole meeting that we're having today of how it all connects. So when we look and see what measures that we look at, graduation rates, when we look and see participation levels in different opportunities within the school, your crime, your statistics as far as what is happening right there, and then your workforce development. So it does go hand in hand from the earliest stages all the way to your graduation levels at the college side.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Lieutenant Governor. A question for you, and then a follow-up question. And the first question has nothing to do with education, but how do you see this upcoming 60-day session playing out from a mechanical standpoint?
Yeah, great question. And that's something that has come up in every one of my interviews that I've done over the last week. It's interesting to see what will happen with Legislative Council and what they'll try to do. From what I gather is that it seems like the Senate and the House are committed to having the 60-day session to move forward with that in a virtual setting. For me, the most important aspect of it is making sure there's engagement from the public. Big ticket items are going to be discussed. There's going to be a lot of opportunity to have a good debate on all sides of the issue. It's just really important that the public is allowed to be part of that, to make sure that it is easily accessible and to make sure that it does meet the need, especially for those people, if it's done virtually, that may not have the best broadband or internet services available there. I still feel that if we go in the 60-day session, if that's virtual, I think that there is the potential and the possibility to come back if some items aren't finished or the higher debated issues need to be done later in the year. You see that there's the potential for a vaccine that's coming out, and that will play into that as well. So I just want to keep that in mind and also encourage the legislators not to put that outside as a potential opportunity to engage the public, to deal with the tough subjects, to make sure that we're having a budget that's going to be balanced, and then making sure that it's done in a safe way.
Okay. And the follow-up question has to do with that balanced budget and education, you know, from early childhood all the way up through higher education is a big part of that state budget. And this year, I know that enrollments are down in the public schools across the board for a myriad of reasons, no fault of the public schools. But potentially, you know, those students come back next year if we've resolved the COVID situation. So how do you see the, knowing we're coming in with a deficit this year in the budget, most likely a big one, how do you see the funding for the schools going?
Yeah, thank you. And again, this is not much different than when we came into the recession in 2010, 2011, where we don't have a deficit, but we have a shortfall simply because New Mexico has to have that balanced budget. And what we saw then is a little bit different than what's taking place right now. Even though that we see the impact that has happened because of COVID, we've seen that the oil and gas side of it, we've seen the projected revenues have come in much higher, which I think currently we may be at a 29% reserve level. That'll help a lot, but it doesn't take away from the fact that we do have big issues coming in, especially when you look and see all the people who may have been on unemployment and the cliff that may take place because those dollars may not be available as they were at the beginning of the pandemic. And what you also see that is taking place because another shutdown that potentially could take place for 2 weeks or even longer. I hope that it's a shorter amount of time, simply because we want to get those dollars circulating. In relation to the budget, some of the things that we need to learn that took place in 2011 that should not take place now is in 2011, many of you can remember that capital outlay spending was halted. I believe 500 million or right around there of capital outlay dollars were not sent out to the state, which didn't allow goods and services to be purchased, didn't allow construction to take place, didn't allow for jobs to be available, and it kept us in the recession much longer. So I'll continue to advocate that we keep capital outlay dollars flowing, projects going, and jobs available. Going to your specific point of question with the education budget, I do think that that has to be part of the legislative discussion, because the reality of it, students have chosen not to enroll in the traditional public schools or charter schools because of safety reasons. Many have chosen to go into the private setting, and many of them have just gone and done the homeschooling aspect of it. We do think that this is temporary, and we would want to make sure that we can have an avenue where we can hold those school districts as much as possible harmless to the enrollment figures that they had previously. The only concern with that is that could lead for potential cliff that could take place in case those numbers don't come back. But these are absolutely the questions that need to be asked as we go forward and ensuring that we have a budget that's going to make sure it meets the needs of our students.
Yeah.
Kyle?
Yes, Terri.
I just wanted to follow up with Lieutenant Governor for just a minute. Did I hear you say, Lieutenant Governor, that Ledge Council did vote today to go forward with the 60-day session?
So I'm not sure if the council has actually voted on that. I was
Okay.
just sharing from what we've gotten information from the Senate, because the Senate and the House did caucus, and some of the recommendations that they would give. If I'm not mistaken, Terri, I think that today may have been a legislative council meeting, but I'm not sure. I know I was on legislative finance committee earlier presenting my budget, but I couldn't tell you if there was a final vote that had been taken place for that legislative council decision.
Okay, I thought, oh gosh, I missed that vote if it occurred. So thank you very much. I appreciate your comments otherwise about making sure whatever is done gives the public a fair and reasonable chance to have full transparency and participate. Thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, this is a question really for both of you, but from Amanda Aragon, and it's what would you say is, and this is a little bit of a tough question, but what would you say is one state policy that, if put in place, would dramatically improve New Mexico's education system?
Well, I can tell you the one thing that I'm hearing across the state. I've been in Artesia, Carlsbad, Roswell, Columbus, New Mexico, all around the state. And what I consistently hear is that we've got to safely and responsibly get our kids back into school. Even though that may not be something that goes through statutes, keeping that in mind, that is a huge step forward to make sure that we can learn to live with COVID, that we can do it in a way that's safe, but that we can get our kids the face-to-face instruction, which science and data tells us that that's the best possible instruction that can take place for a student.
Amen.
Yeah, I would echo that and say, I think something that this administration and Governor Lujan Grisham has been very strong on is just universal access. We have a lot of programs that have eligibility requirements and things that I think keep us from being able to really create a system that is equitable. So I would encourage us to see wherever we can remove barriers to access through things like eligibility. That would be things that I would encourage us to look at.
Okay. Maybe a follow-on question. You both mentioned transformation is key in staffing. Continues, at least within APS, I think, to be one of the major challenges year in and year out. And COVID is obviously not helped with that. But any thoughts on just how to? I know, Lieutenant Governor, you mentioned getting rid of or doing away with the standardized testing has helped some on the staffing front, remove some of that anxiety. But any silver bullets on staffing?
Yeah, I wish we had some silver bullets and make life so much easier if we were able to have that. And I just wanted to clarify is that I don't think that we need to completely eliminate some of the testing and showing where we're at. It's just a way that we use that and making sure that that's done as a supportive measure of how we can continually improve rather than a punitive measures that was used to shut down schools rather than lift them up. But when we came in our administration early on, we knew that there was 747 teacher vacancies. This is a concern when you don't have that professional in the classroom and that has to be filled by a long-term sub or an educational assistant. That really does have an impact. And when I say that, the educational assistants have an amazing role that they play within the school system. My mother was an educational assistant, but to make sure that we also have that educator, whether it's in a content subject area or if it's in an elective part of it, that they are engaging with those students. So when you look and see what we can do in addition to the staffing part of it, again, the messaging has to come out that we do value our educators. The value has to be placed not only on what we do as far as the compensation aspect of it, but what also we do to make sure that we're evaluating their creativity and we're evaluating the way that they can connect with the students. And at the end of the day, that they're making those relationships count for better improvements on the student achievement piece of it. Again, as I've always said it, that many educators that I've spoken with left the profession because they just didn't feel that they were valued. They didn't feel as a profession that they were at the same level that maybe physicians or attorneys or even business people who may have had a seat at the table. And now, that's been consistently a message of mine, is to ensure that our educators have a voice in what decisions are made, that they have an opportunity to make sure that they know that they can help build up those students, but not be determined by a measure that's not going to be fair. We're going to be done in a way that doesn't take into account poverty, doesn't take into account other out-of-school factors that what we know since the 1960s weigh 2 times as much as the in-class factors.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. One more question for.
I would just add to all that, to just continue to make sure we're focusing on the cultures and languages of New Mexico and really bringing that forward and echoing that, valuing the role of the early childhood educators and all educators, but just we really do need to focus on culture and language as as we transform the system. That's part of our charge ahead.
Thank you, Peter.
Yeah, maybe a very quick follow-up question for the Lieutenant Governor. I believe the pandemic here is a great opportunity for us to innovate and really kind of like bring up new ideas. And in the business community, like we all recognize, innovation doesn't happen when it's punitive, right? When you don't have when you don't allow people to fail, right? What do you think of can be done to kind of like change systems and structures to really bring the creative ideas out of the educators and surface them?
Absolutely. As tough as COVID has been and as tough as this pandemic has forced us to change our way of living, it does present that opportunity and that pathway to be innovative, to find ways that we can have the potential of surpassing any goals that we may have thought. So I think that this gives us that potential there. When we look and see from an education standpoint or even a business standpoint, is to reward that innovation. To reward and set a system that it's okay, you think grandly, you may have not achieved exactly those goals, but what did you learn from that? And what are the opportunities that we can continue to move forward and to grow in? And I'll continue to push forward that our policies that are in place allow us a chance to think grandly, but also understanding that we as humans are going to have areas where we have some shortcomings. How can we build off of those, and what can we do to have that within all of our systems across the state?
Okay, thank you. One more quick question for Secretary Groginski, and that is that you mentioned free childcare for essential workers, for those in need, and how do they gain access to these resources? And that comes from Yolanda Lovato.
Thank you for that question. Yes, we were able to do that in the early part of the pandemic with the funding we received through CARES, the CARES Act, the Federal CARES Act. So that kind of goes to my other point earlier, or just the previous, about a state policy that we should really look at eliminating some of those barriers to people accessing childcare, because currently we're not able to offer it to essential workers, but we did that for 4 months from March up and through to the end of June. But so that was that. And we will continue to look at those opportunities as we move forward, but it's important that childcare is out of reach, the cost for most families. And so we need to really think about this and how do we support all families with accessing childcare.
Okay, thank you. We had several other questions that came in from the audience, and hopefully we touched on those questions as we went through some of the related questions. So we've got to wrap it up. Thank you so much, Secretary, Lieutenant Governor. Very, very much appreciated. Very relevant and relevant to what we've got going on today. Before we sign off, I want to thank all of our audience, our business leaders, investors, partners for joining us. I want to thank again our sponsors, UNM, Unirac, P&M, Western Sky, Bank of Albuquerque, Molina, New Mexico Mutual, Excellent Schools New Mexico, C&M, Albertsons, Blue Cross Blue Shield, and General Mills. We hope everyone will be able to attend our public safety big event that's coming up on December 3rd. We're calling it our Crime Stat Briefing 2020 with DA Raul Torres. He will present to the community on our latest crime trends and efforts being made to drive down the crime rates and prosecute serious offenders here in Albuquerque. This is our 3rd annual Crime Stat Briefing, and it is always very, very insightful. In just 4 days from today, we hope everyone will turn out for the Chamber's annual meeting. Will be a little bit different this year. It's November 20th, 11:45 to 1. The event will feature a panel discussion about recovery from the coronavirus. It's entitled The Way Back to Health and Work. We'll discuss the latest prospects for a vaccine, the continued development of COVID treatments, and we'll hear an update on what we can expect in the next round of federal pandemic relief legislation. We'll have Dr. Mike Ibarra from Pharma, Carlos Garner from Eli Lilly and Company, and Neil Bradley from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce on the panel. You won't want to miss it, and there's still time to register, so please do that. We're thankful to have had you with us today. We urge all of you to remember that education of our children should be a top priority for all of us all of the time, and I know it is. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful day, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.